Happy Monday. Time to start a new week. We are doing Grimm's fairy tales. And the first story that we will be reading is called The Elves. And it looks like there's two parts. So let's start with part one. There was once a shoemaker who, through no fault of his own, became so poor that at last he had nothing left but just enough leather to make one pair of shoes. He cut out the shoes at night so as to set to work upon them next morning, and as he had a good conscience, he laid himself quietly down in his bed, committed himself to heaven, and fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers and was going to get to work, he found the pair of shoes made and finished and standing on his table. He was very much astonished and could not tell what to think, and he took the shoes in his hand to examine them more neatly, and they were so well made that every stitch was in its right place, just as if they had come from the hand of a master workman. Soon after, a purchaser entered, and as the shoes fitted him very well, he gave more than the usual price for them, so that the shoemaker had enough money to buy leather for 2 more pairs of shoes. He cut them out at night and intended to set to work on them in the next morning with fresh spirit, but that was not to be, for when he got up they were already finished, and a customer even was not lacking, who gave him so much money that he was able to buy leather enough for 4 new pairs. Early next morning he found the 4 pairs also finished, and so it always happened. Whatever he cut out in the evening was worked up by the morning, so he was soon in the way of making a good living, and in the end became very well to do. One night, not long before Christmas, when the shoemaker had finished cutting out, and before he went to bed, he said to his wife, "How would it be if we were to sit up tonight and see who it was that does us this service?" The wife agreed and set a light to burn. Then they both hid in a corner of the room behind some coats that were hanging up, and then they began to watch. As soon as it was midnight, they saw come in 2 neatly formed naked little men, who seated themselves before the shoemaker's table, and took up the work that was already prepared, and began to stitch, to pierce, and to hammer so cleverly and quickly with their little fingers, that the shoemaker's eyes could scarcely follow them, so full of wonder was he. And they never left off until everything was finished and was standing ready on the table, and then they jumped up and ran off. The next morning the shoemaker's wife said to her husband, "Those little men have made us rich, and we ought to show ourselves grateful. With all their running about and having nothing to cover them, they must be very cold. I'll tell you what, I will make little shirts, coats, waistcoats, and breeches for them, and knit each of them a pair of stockings, and you shall make each of them a pair of shoes." The husband consented willingly, and at night, when everything was finished, they laid the gifts together on the table instead of the cut-out work, and placed themselves so that they could observe how the little men would behave. When midnight came, they rushed in, ready to set to work, but when they found, instead of the pieces of prepared leather, the neat little garments put ready for them, they stood a moment in surprise, and then they testified the greatest delight. With the greatest swiftness they took up the pretty garments and slipped them on, singing, "What spruce and dandy boys we are, no longer cobblers will we be." Then they hopped and danced about, jumping over the chairs and tables, and at last they danced out the door. From that time they were never seen again, but it always went well with the shoemaker as long as he lived, and whatever he took in hand prospered. Part 2. Happy Youth Day. Part 2. There was once a poor servant maid who was very cleanly and industrious. She swept down the house every day and put the sweepings on a great heap by the door. One morning, before she began her work, she found a letter as she could not read. She laid her broom in the, she found a letter, and as she could not read, she laid her broom in the corner and took the letter to her master and mistress to see what it was about. And it was an invitation from the elves, who wished the maid to come and stand godmother to one of their children. The maid did not know what to do, and as she was told that no one ought to refuse the elves anything, she made up her mind to go. So there came 3 little elves who conducted her into the middle of a high mountain where the little people lived. Here everything was of a very small size, but more fine and elegant than can be told. The mother of the child lay in a bed made of ebony, studded with pearls. The counterpane was embroidered with gold. The cradle was of ivory, and the bathing tub of gold. So the maid stood godmother, and was then for going home, but the elves begged her to stay at least 3 more days with them, and so she consented and spent the time in mirth and jollity, and the elves seemed very fond of her. At last, when she was ready to go away, they filled her pockets full of gold and led her back again out of the mountain. When she got back to the house, she was going to begin working again, and took her broom in her hand, and it was still standing in the corner where she had left it, and began to sweep. Then came up some strangers and asked her who she was and what she was doing. And she found that instead of 3 days, she had been 7 years with the elves in the mountain, and during that time her master and mistress had died. Part 3. Yes, he is not here today. Part 3. The elves once took away a child from its mother and left in its place a changeling with a big head and staring eyes, who did nothing but eat and drink. The mother in her trouble went to the neighbors and asked their advice. The neighbors told her to take the changeling into the kitchen and put it near the hearth, and then to make up the fire and boil water in 2 eggshells. That would make the changeling laugh, and if he laughed, it would be all over with him. So the woman did as her neighbors advised, and when she set the eggshells of water on the fire, the changeling said, "Though old I be, as forest tree, cooking in an eggshell never did I see," and began to laugh. And directly there came in a crowd of elves bringing in the right child, and they laid it near the hearth and carried the changeling away with them. Next is called the Robber Bridegroom. There was once a miller who had a beautiful daughter, and when she was grown up, she became anxious that she should be well married and taken care of. So he thought, if a decent sort of man comes and asks her in marriage, I will give her to him. Soon after, a suitor came forward who seemed very well-to-do, and as the miller knew nothing to his disadvantage, he promised him his daughter. But the girl did not seem to love him as a bride should love her bridegroom. So she had no confidence in him. As often as she saw him or thought about him, she felt a chill at her heart. One day he said to her, "You are to be my bride, and yet you have never been to see me." The girl answered, "I do not know where your house is." Then he said, "My house is a long way in the wood." She began to make excuses and said she could not find the way to it, but the bridegroom said, "You must come and pay me a visit next Sunday. I have already invited company, and I will strew ashes on the path through the wood so that you will be sure to find it." When Sunday came and the girl set out on her way, she felt very uneasy without knowing exactly why. And she filled both pockets full of peas and lentils. There were ashes strewn on the path through the wood, but nevertheless, at each step she cast to the right and left a few peas on the ground. So she went on the whole day until she came to the middle of the wood, where it was the darkest, and there stood a lonely house, not pleasant in her eyes, for it was dismal and unhomelike. She walked in, but there was no one there, and the great stillness reigned. Suddenly she heard a voice cry, turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not bide, for here do evil things betide." The girl glanced round and perceived that the voice came from a bird who was hanging in a cage by the wall. And again it cried, turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not bide, for here do evil things betide." Then the pretty bride went on from one room into another through the whole house, but it was quite empty, and no soul to be found in it. At last she reached the cellar, and there sat a very old woman nodding her head. "Can you tell me," said the bride, "if my bridegroom lives here?" "Oh, poor child," answered the old woman. "Do you know what has happened to you? You are in a place of cutthroats. You thought you were a bride and soon to be married, but death will be your spouse. Look here, I have a great kettle of water to set on, and when once they have you in their power, they will cut you in pieces without mercy, cook you and eat you, for they are cannibals. Unless I have pity on you and save you, all is over with you." Then the old woman hid her behind a great cask where she could not be seen. "Be as still as a mouse," said she. "Do not move or go away, or else you are lost. At night, when the robbers are asleep, we will escape. I have been waiting a long time for this opportunity." No sooner was it settled than the wicked gang entered the house. They brought another young woman with them, dragging her along, and they were drunk and would not listen to her cries and groans. They gave her wine to drink, 3 glasses full, one of white wine, one of red, and one of yellow, and then they cut her in pieces. The poor bride all the while shaking and trembling when she saw what a fate the robbers had intended for her. One of them noticed on the little finger of their victim a golden ring, and as he could not draw it off easily, he took an axe and chopped it off, but the finger jumped away and fell behind the cask on the bride's lap. The robber took up a light to look for it, but he could not find it. Then said one of the others, "Have you looked behind the great cask?" But the old woman cried, "Come to supper and leave off looking till tomorrow. The finger cannot run away." Then the robbers said the old woman was right, and they left off searching and sat down to eat, and the old woman dropped some sleeping stuff into their wine, so that before long they stretched themselves on the cellar floor, sleeping and snoring. When the bride heard that, she came from behind the cask and had to make her way among the sleepers lying all about on the ground, and she felt very much afraid lest she might awaken any of them. But by good luck she passed through, and the old woman with her, and they opened the door, and they made all haste to leave the house of murderers. The wind had carried away the ashes from the path, but the peas and lentils had budded and sprung up, and the moonshine upon them showed the way. And they went on through the night, till in the morning they reached the mill. Then the girl related to her father all that had happened to her. When the wedding day came, the friends and neighbors assembled, the miller having invited them, and the bridegroom also appeared. When they were all seated at table, each one had to tell a story. But the bride sat still and said nothing, till at last the bridegroom said to her, "Now, sweetheart, do you know no story? Tell us something." She answered, "I will tell you my dream. I was going alone through a wood and came at last to a house into which there was no living soul, but by the wall was a bird in a cage who cried, 'Turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not bide, for evil things do here betide.'" And then again it said it again. And then again it said it. Sorry. "Sweetheart, the dream is not ended. Then I went through all rooms, and they were all empty, and it was so lonely and wretched. At last I went down into the cellar, and there sat an old woman nodding her head. I asked her if my bridegroom lived in that house, and she answered, 'Ah, poor child, you have come into a place of cutthroats. Your bridegroom does live here, but he will kill you and cut you in pieces, and then cook and eat you.' Sweetheart, the dream is not ended. But the old woman hid me behind a great cask, and no sooner had she done so than the robbers came home, dragging with them a young woman, and they gave her to drink wine thrice, white, red, and yellow. Sweetheart, the dream is not yet ended. And then they killed her and cut her in pieces. Sweetheart, my dream is not yet ended. And one of the robbers saw a gold ring on the finger of the young woman, and as it was difficult to get off, he took an axe and chopped up the finger, which jumped upwards and then fell behind the great cask on my lap. And here is the finger with the ring. At these words, she drew it forth and showed it to the company. The robber, who during the story had grown deadly white, sprang up and would have escaped, but the folks held him fast and delivered him up to justice. And he and his whole gang were, for their evil deeds, condemned and executed. Next is Mr. Korbes. A cock and a hen once wanted to go on a journey together. So the cock built a beautiful carriage with 4 red wheels, and he harnessed 4 little mice to it. And the cock and hen got into it and were driven off. Very soon they met a cat who asked where they were going. The cock answered, "On Mr. Korbes' call to pay, and that is where we go today." "Take me with you," said the cat. The cock answered, "Very well, only you must sit well back, and then you will not fall forward. And pray take care of my red wheels there, and wheels be steady, and mice be ready. On Mr. Korbes' a call to pay, for that is where we go today." Then there came up a millstone, then an egg, then a duck, then a pin, and lastly a needle, who all got up on the carriage and were driven along. But when they came to Mr. Korbes' house, he was not at home. So the mice drew the carriage into the barn, the cock and the hen flew up and perched on a beam, the cat sat by the fireside, the duck settled on the water, but the egg wrapped itself in the towel, the pin stuck itself in the chair cushion, the needle jumped into the bed among the pillows, and the millstone laid itself by the door. Then Mr. Korbes came home and went to the hearth to make a fire, but the cat threw ashes in his eyes. Then he ran quickly into the kitchen to wash himself, but the duck splashed water in his face. Then he was going to wipe it with a towel, but the egg broke in it and stuck his eyelids together. In order to get a little peace, he sat down upon his chair, but the pin ran into him, and starting up, in his vexation, he threw himself on the bed, but his head fell on the pillow, in went the needle, so that he called out in pain again and madly rushed out. But when he reached the house door, the millstone jumped up and struck him dead. What a bad man Mr. Korbes must have been. Yeah. This next one is called Tom Thumb's Travels. We did already read one on Tom Thumb, so hope everyone remembers. Tom Thumb's Travels. There was once a tailor who had a son no higher than a thumb, so he was called Tom Thumb. Notwithstanding his small size, he had plenty of spirit, and one day he said to his father, "Father, go out into the world I must and will." "Very well, my son," said the old man, and taking a long darning needle, he put a knob of sealing wax on the end, saying, "Here is a sword to take with you on your little journey." Now the little tailor wanted to have one more meal first, and so he trotted into the kitchen to see what sort of a farewell feast his mother had cooked for him. It was all ready, and the dish was standing on the hearth. Then said he, "Mother, what is the fare today?" "You can see for yourself," said the mother. Then Tom Thumb ran to the hearth and peered into the dish, but as he stretched his neck too far over it, the steam caught him and carried him up into the chimney. For a time he floated with the steam about in the air, but at last he sank down to the ground. Then the little tailor found himself out in the wide world, and he wandered about and finally engaged himself to a master tailor, but the food was not good enough for him. "Mistress," said Tom Thumb, "if you do not give us better victuals, I shall go out early in the morning and write with a piece of chalk on the house door, plenty of potatoes to eat, but little meat. So goodbye, Mr. Potato." "What are you after, Grasshopper?" said the mistress, and growing angry, she seized a piece of rag to beat him off, but he crept underneath her thimble and then peeped at her and put his tongue out at her. She took up the thimble and would have seized him, but he hopped among the rags, and as the mistress turned them over to find him, he stepped into a crack in the table. "Hee, mistress," cried he, sticking out his head, and when she was going to grasp him, he jumped up into the table drawer. But in the end she caught him and drove him out of the house. So he wandered on until he came to a great wood, and there he met a gang of robbers that were going to rob the king's treasury. When they saw the little tailor, they thought to themselves, "Such a little fellow might easily creep through a keyhole and serve instead of a picklock." "Hello," cried one, "you giant Goliath, will you come with us to the treasure chamber? You can slip in and then throw us out the money." Tom Thumb considered a little, but at last he consented and went with them to the treasure chamber. Then he looked all over the doors above and below, but there was no crack to be seen. At last he found one broad enough to let him pass, and he was getting through when one of the sentinels that stood before the door saw him and said to the other, "See what an ugly spider is crawling there. I will put an end to him." "Let the poor creature alone," said the other. "It has done you no harm." So Tom Thumb got safely through the crack into the treasure chamber, and he opened the window beneath which the thieves were standing, and he threw them out $1 after another. Just as he had well settled to the work, he heard the king coming to take a look at his treasure, and so Tom Thumb had to creep away. The king presently remarked that many good dollars were wanting, but could not imagine how they could have been stolen, as the locks and bolts were in good order and everything seemed secure. And he went away, saying to the 2 sentinels, "Keep good guard, there is someone after the money." When Tom Thumb had set to work anew, they heard the chink of the money and hastily rushed in to catch the thief. But the little tailor, as he heard them coming, was too quick for them, and hiding in a corner, he covered himself up with $1 so that nothing on him was to be seen, and then he mocked the sentinels, crying, "Here I am!" They ran about, and when they came near him, he was soon in another corner under another $1, crying, "Here I am!" Then the sentinels ran towards him, and in a moment he was in a third corner, crying, "Here I am!" In this way he made fools of them, and dodged them so long about the treasure chamber that they got tired and went away. Then he set to work and threw the $dollars out of the window, one after the other, till they were all gone. And when it came to the last, he flung it with all his might. He jumped nimbly on it, and flew with it out of the window. The robbers gave him great praise, saying, "You are a most valiant hero. Will you be our captain?" But Tom Thumb thanked them and said he would like to see the world first. Then they divided the spoil, but the little tailor's share was only 1 farthing, which was all he was able to carry. Then binding his sword to his spine, he bid the robbers good day and started on his way. He applied to several master tailors, but they would have nothing to do with him, and at last he hired himself as an indoor servant at an inn. The maidservants took a great dislike to him, for he used to see everything they did without being seen by them, and he told the master and mistress about what they took from the plates, what they carried away out of the cellar. And they said, "Wait a little, we will pay you out," and took counsel together to pay him some mischievous trick. Once, when one of the maids was mowing the grass in the garden, she saw Tom Thumb jumping about and creeping among the cabbages, and she mowed him with the grass, tied all together with a bundle, and threw it out to the cows. Among the cows was a big black one, who swallowed him down without doing him any harm. But he did not like his lodging. It was so dark, and there was no candle to be had. When the cow was being milked, he cried out, "Strip, strip, straw, will the pail soon be full?" But he was not understood because of the noise of the milk. Presently, the landlord came into the stable and said, "Tomorrow this cow is to be slaughtered." At that, Tom Thumb felt very satisfied, and with his shrillest voice he cried, "Let me out first. I am sitting inside here." The master heard him quite plainly, but he could not tell where the voice came from. "Where are you?" asked he. "Inside the black one," answered Tom Thumb, but the master, not understanding the meaning of it all, went away. The next morning the cow was slaughtered. Happily, in all the cutting and slashing, he escaped all harm, and he slipped out among the sausage meat. When the butcher came near to set to work, he cried with all his might, "Don't cut so deep, don't cut so deep, I am underneath." But for the sound of the butcher's knife, his voice was not heard. Now, poor Tom Thumb was in great strains, and he had to jump nimbly out of the way of the knife, and finally he came through with a whole skin. But he could not quite get away, and he had to let himself remain with the lumps of fat to be put in a black pudding. His quarters were rather narrow, and he had to be hung up in the chimney in the smoke, and to remain there a very long while. At last, when winter came, he was taken down, for the black pudding was to be set before a guest. And when the landlady cut the black pudding into slices, he had to take great care not to lift up his head too much, or it might be shaved off at the neck. At last he saw his opportunity, took courage, and jumped out. But as things had gone so badly with him in that house, Tom Thumb did not mean to stay there, but betook himself again to his wanderings. His freedom, however, did not last long. In the open fields there came a fox who snapped him up without thinking. "Oh, Mr. Fox," cries Tom Thumb, "here I am sticking in your throat. Let me out again." "Very well," answered the fox. "It is true you are no better than nothing. Promise me the hens in your father's yard, then I will let you go." "With all my heart," answered Tom Thumb. "You shall have them, I promise you." Then the fox let him go, and he ran home. When the father saw his dear little son again, he gave the fox willingly all the hens he had. "And look, besides, what a fine piece of money I got for you," said Tom Thumb, and handed over the farthing which he had earned in his wanderings. "But how, you ask, could they let the fox devour all the poor chicks? Why, you silly child, you know that your father would rather have you than hens in his yard." Yeah, that's the end of that. Next is called The Almond Tree. This might be our last one. It's quite long. The Almond Tree. A long time ago, perhaps as much as 2,000 years, there was a rich man, and he had a beautiful and pious wife, and they loved each other very much, and they had no children, though they wished greatly for some, and the wife prayed for one day and night. Now in the courtyard in front of their house stood an almond tree, and one day in winter the wife was standing beneath it and paring an apple, and as she pared it she cut her finger, and the blood fell upon the snow. "Ah," said the woman, sighing deeply and looking down at the blood, "if only I could have a child as red as blood and as white as snow." "Oh, is this Snow White?" "Might be." And as she said these words, her heart suddenly grew light, and she felt sure she should have her wish. So she went back to the house, and when a month had passed, the snow was gone, In 2 months, everything was green. In 3 months, the flowers sprang out of the earth. In 4 months, the trees were in full leaf, and the branches were thickly entwined, and the little birds began to sing, so that the woods echoed, and the blossoms fell from the trees. When the 5th month had passed, the wife stood under the almond tree, and it smelled so sweet that her heart leapt within her, and she fell on her knees for joy. And when the 6th month had gone, the fruit was thick and fine, and she remained still. In the 7th month she gathered the almonds, and ate them eagerly, and was sick and sorrowful. And when the 8th month had passed, she called to her husband, and said, weeping, If I die, bury me under the almond tree. Then she was comforted and happy until the 9th month had passed, and then she bore a child as white as snow and as red as blood. And when she saw it, her joy was so great that she died. Her husband buried her under the almond tree, and he wept sore. Time passed, and he became less sad. And after he had grieved a little more, he left off, and then took another wife. His second wife bore him a daughter, and his first wife's child was a son, as red as blood and as white as snow. Whenever the wife looked at the daughter, she felt a great love for her, but whenever she looked at the little boy, evil thoughts came into her heart of how she could get all her husband's money for her daughter, and how the boy stood in the way. And so she took great hatred to him, and drove him from one corner to another, and gave him a buffet here and a cuff there, so that the poor child was always in disgrace. When he came back after school hours, there was no peace for him. Once, when the wife went into the room upstairs, her little daughter followed her and said, Mother, give me an apple. Yes, my child, said the mother, and gave her a fine apple out of the chest, and the chest had a great heavy lid with a strong iron lock. Mother, said the little girl, shall not my brother have one too? That was what the mother expected, and she said, Yes, when he comes back from school. And when she saw from the window he was coming, an evil thought crossed her mind, and she snatched the apple and took it from her little daughter, saying, You shall not have it before your brother. Then she threw the apple into the chest and shut the lid. Then the little boy came in at the door, and she said to him in a kind tone, but with evil looks, My son, will you have an apple? Mother, said the boy, how terrible you look. Yes, give me an apple. Then she spoke as kindly as before, holding up the cover of the chest. Come here and take out one for yourself. And as the boy was stooping over the open chest, Crash went down the lid so that his head flew off among the red apples. But then the woman felt great terror and wondered how she could escape the blame. And she went to the chest of drawers in her bedroom and took a white handkerchief out of the nearest drawer, and fitting the head to the neck, she bound them with the handkerchief so that nothing could be seen, and set him on a chair before the door with the apple in his hand. Then came little Marjorie into the kitchen to her mother, who was standing before the fire stirring a pot of hot water. Mother, said Marjorie, my brother is sitting before the door, and he has an apple in his hand, and he looks very pale. I asked him to give me the apple, but he did not answer me. He seems very strange. Go again to him, said the mother, and if he will not answer you, give him a box in the ear. So Marjorie went again and said, Brother, give me the apple. But as he took no notice, she gave him a box in the ear, and his head fell off, at which she was greatly terrified, and began to cry and scream, and ran to her mother, and said, Oh, mother, I have knocked my brother's head off, and cried and screamed, and would not cease. Oh, Marjorie, said her mother, what have you done? But keep quiet, that no one may see there is anything the matter. It can't be helped now. We will put him out of the way safely. When the father came home and sat down to the table, he said, Where is my son? But the mother was filling a great dish full of black broth, and Marjorie was crying bitterly, for she could not refrain. Then the father said again, Where is my son? Oh, said the mother, he has gone into the country to his great uncle's to stay for a little while. What should he go for? Said the father, and without bidding me goodbye, too. Oh, he wanted to go so much, and he asked me to let him stay there 6 weeks. He will be well taken care of. Dear me, said the father, I am quite sad about it. It was not right of him to go without bidding me goodbye. With that he began to eat, saying, Marjorie, what are you crying for? Your brother will come back sometime. After a while he said, Well, wife, the food is very good. Give me some more. And the more he ate, the more he wanted, until he had eaten it all up, and he threw the bones under the table. Then Marjorie went to her chest of drawers and took one of her best handkerchiefs from the bottom drawer, and picked up all the bones from under the table and tied them up in her handkerchief, and went out the door crying bitterly. She laid them in the green grass under the almond tree, and immediately her heart grew light again, and she wept no more. Then the almond tree began to wave to and fro, and the boughs drew together and then parted, just like a clapping of hands for joy. Then a cloud rose from the tree, and in the midst of the cloud there burned a fire, and out of the fire a beautiful bird arose, and, singing most sweetly, soared high into the air. And when he had flown away, the almond tree remained as it was before, but the handkerchief full of bones was gone. Marjorie felt quite glad and light-hearted, just as if her brother were still alive. So she went back merrily into the house and had her dinner. The bird, when it flew away, perched on the roof of a goldsmith's house, and it began to sing, It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Then in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Quit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. The goldsmith was sitting in his shop making a golden chain, and when he heard the bird, who was sitting on his roof and singing, he started up to go and look, and as he passed over his threshold, he lost one of his slippers. And he went into the middle of the street with a slipper on one foot and only a sock on the other, with his apron on and the gold chain in his hand and the pincers in the other, and so he stood in the sunshine looking up at the bird. Bird, said he, how beautifully you sing. Do sing that piece over again. No, said the bird, I do not sing for nothing twice. If you will give me that gold chain, I will sing again. Very well, said the goldsmith. Here is the gold chain. Now do as you said. Down came the bird and took the gold chain in his right claw, perched in front of the goldsmith, and sang, It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Quit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. Then the bird flew to the shoemaker's and perched on his roof and sang, It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Quit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. When the shoemaker heard, he ran out of his door in his shirt-sleeved and looked up at the roof of his house, holding his hand to shade his eyes from the sun. Bird, said he, how beautifully you sing. Then he called in at his door, Wife, come out directly. Here is a bird singing beautifully. Only listen. Then he called his daughter, all his children and acquaintance, both young men and maidens, and they came up the street and gazed on the bird, and saw how beautiful it was with red and green feathers, and round its throat was at it were gold, and its eyes twinkled in its head like stars. Bird, said the shoemaker, do sing that piece over again. No, said the bird, I may not sing for nothing twice. You must give me something. Wife, said the man, go into the shop. On the top shelf stands a pair of red shoes. Bring them here. So the wife went and brought the shoes. Now, bird, said the man, sing us that piece again. And the bird came down and took the shoes in his left claw and flew up again to the roof and sang, It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Quit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. And when he had finished, he flew away with the chain in his right claw and the shoes in his left claw. And he flew till he reached a mill, and the mill went clip-clap, clip-clap, clip-clap. And in the mill sat 20 miller's men hewing a stone, hick-hack, 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 while the mill was going clip-clap, clip-clap, clip-clap. And the bird perched on a linden tree that stood in front of the mill and sang, It was my mother who murdered me. Here one of the men looked up. It was my father who ate of me. Then 2 more looked up and listened. It was my sister Marjorie. Here 4 more looked up. Who all my bones in pieces found. Then in a handkerchief she bound. Now there were only 8 left hewing, and laid them under the almond tree. Now only 5. Quit, 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 I cry. Now only 1. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. At length the last one left off, and he heard only the end. Bird, said he, how beautifully you sing. Let me hear it all. Sing that again. No, said the bird, I may sing it for nothing twice. If you will give me the millstone, I will sing it again. Indeed, said the man, if it belonged to me alone, you should have it. All right, said the others, if he sings again, he shall have it. Then the bird came down, and with all the 20 millers heaved up the stone with poles. Yo, heave ho, yo, heave ho. And the bird stuck his head through the hole in the middle, and with the millstone round his neck, he flew up to the tree and sang, It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Quit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. And when he had finished, he spread his wings, having in the right claw the chain, in the left claw the shoes, and round his neck the millstone, and flew away to his father's house. In the parlor sat the father, the mother, and Marjorie at the table. The father said, How light-hearted and cheerful I feel. Nay, said the mother, I feel very low, just as if a great storm were coming. But Marjorie sat weeping, and the bird came flying and perched on the roof. Oh, said the father, I feel so joyful, and the sun is shining so bright, as if I were going to meet with an old friend. Nay, said the wife, I am terrified, my teeth chatter, and there is fire in my veins. And she tore open her dress to get air, and Marjorie sat in a corner and wept, with her plate before her, until it was quite full of tears. Then the bird perched on the almond tree and sang, It was my mother who murdered me. And the mother stopped her cars and hid her eyes. Stopped her ears, I think, is what it's supposed to say. And the mother stopped her ears and hid her eyes, and would neither see nor hear. Nevertheless, the noise of a fearful storm was in her ears, and in her eyes a quivering and burning as of lightning. It was my father who ate of me. Oh, mother, said the father, there is a beautiful bird singing so finely, and the sun shines, and everything smells as sweet as cinnamon. It was my sister Marjorie. Marjorie hid her face in her lap and wept, and the father said, I must go out and see the bird. "Oh, do not go," said the wife. "I feel as if the house were on fire." But the man went out and looked at the bird, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Quit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. With that, the bird let fall the golden chain upon his father's neck, and it fitted him exactly. So he went indoors and said, "Look what a beautiful chain the bird has given me." Then his wife was so terrified that she fell all along on the floor, and off came her cap. Then the bird began to sing, "It was my mother who murdered me." "Oh," groaned the mother, "that I were 1,000 fathoms underground, so as not to be obliged to hear it." "It was my father who ate of me." Then the woman lay as if she were dead. "It was my sister Marjorie." "Oh," said Marjorie, "I will go out too and see if the bird will give me anything." And so she went. Who all my bones in pieces found, them in a handkerchief she bound. Then he threw the shoes down at her, and laid them under the almond tree. Quit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. And poor Marjorie all at once felt happy and joyful, and put on her red shoes and danced and jumped for joy. "Oh dear," said she, "I felt so sad before I went outside, and now my heart is so light. He is a charming bird to have given me a pair of red shoes." But the mother's hair stood on end and looked like flame, and she said, "Even if the world is coming to an end, I must go out for a little relief." Just as she came outside the door, crash went the millstone on her head and crushed her flat. The father and daughter rushed out and saw smoke and flames of fire rise up. But when that had gone by, there stood the little brother, and he took his father and Marjorie by the hand, and they felt very happy and content, and went indoors and sat to the table and had their dinner. That's all for today. That's where we're going to stop. I will upload this on YouTube. It's the same name as this channel. I think it's linked. It's called K.A. Reads Classics. That's all one word, no space. And I will be back tomorrow. So thanks so much for reading with me, and I hope you have a great day.